This is My Taste is Better Than Yours, the manga podcast where Guardian Enzo and I, Samu, discuss some of our favourite series and figure out, is my taste better than yours?
Good evening, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are as you're watching or listening. It's your old pal, Guardian Enzo, coming to you as always, live on tape from beautiful Kyoto, Japan, a slightly different part of Kyoto, Japan. I've moved, which I'm sure is of minimal to no interest of anyone aside from my immediate family, and even there, I think it's probably pretty minimal. And of course, joining me as always is my broadcast partner and podcast co-host, Samu. How you doing, Samu?
I'm doing well. I have not moved, I'm afraid. Still the same place in London. Yeah, I'm doing good. I mean, we're not talking about Kyoto today, though. We've got another Japanese city that
Yes,
you're going to be discussing.
yes, indeed. That's a nice segue. But then you are a professional. Um, we're doing a little experiment here where we're each going to be we're going to be doing a couple of big Shonen Jump kaiju series. You know, we did our kaiju show recently. What makes a kaiju? So we're going to cover a couple of kaiju that were missing from the others' resume. I'm going to be, or I have at this point read the first major arc of a series that's very near and dear to Samu's heart. And he has read one that's very near and dear to my heart. And while neither one of us would say that the first arcs of these series are the best arcs, they are nevertheless the first arcs, so they're the ones that we're going to cover. So the first part of this Edward Elric in equivalent exchange program is Rurouni Kenshin, which anyone who knows me knows is a series that's very near and dear to my heart. It's one of the first Japanese series I've consumed both in manga form and anime form. So yeah, it's a pretty big deal for me, this one. And Samu being really the Shonen Jump Weekly Shonen Jump expert, had never read it, and I thought that was an oversight. So we decided to go ahead and bring Rurouni Kenshin into the My Taste is Better Than Yours fold. So that's what we're going to do. And we're going to cover the Tokyo arc of Rurouni Kenshin, which is both the shortest and I would say probably the least monumental of all the major arcs. I mean, the three major arcs of the main series Rurouni Kenshin are Tokyo, Kyoto, and Jinshu, or Revenge. And there's other stuff that's gone in, side stories and OVAs that were not based on the original, or were based on, but were not written by Watsuki. And then the Hokkaido arc, which is kind of a sequel follow-up. But basically, those are the three main arcs. And we're going to talk about Tokyo, which sets up the rest of the series, basically. And let's talk a little bit about Rurouni Kenshin. It ran from 1994 to 1999, I believe. Of course, a weekly Shonen Jump series. Sold about well over 70 million volumes, well over 70 million volumes for its 36 volumes. So averaged a little over 2 million per volume, which certainly qualifies it as a kaiju. Has seen a follow-up of live action films, animated theatrical films, animated OVAs, and now a reboot, which is currently in the process of airing. It's about halfway through the Kyoto arc, which means it's about halfway through the total series. Now on hiatus, but we know another season is coming soon. So this is definitely a kaiju. It's definitely a big deal. And so the reality what we have to talk about, like when we do Hunter x Hunter, we don't sweat spoilers so much because it's a series that's been finished for such a long time in anime and manga form. But of course, as with the series I picked up that Samu referred to me, Samu has not read beyond the Tokyo arc, so we can't talk about anything that goes on past Tokyo, just as we won't be able to talk about anything that goes past the arc I read in the series that he recommended to me. So we are somewhat limited in our discussions of the series in that we can only talk about the first major arcs, and we can't, if you will, impurify that with knowledge that's gained from later. So for this discussion, we will have a non-spoiler spoiler section just for those of you who have no familiarity with the series, both of you. But we will restrict it to the Tokyo arc, even in the spoiler section. So, Samu, let's get started first a little bit. I want to talk about this question because we did just do a what makes an anime kaiju, what makes a manga kaiju. What is it about Rurouni Kenshin? What qualities, and now having read the first, admittedly not the strongest, but the first major arc of the series, give me your 2 cents on why you think this series became a Shonen Jump kaiju.
So, I mean, if we're comparing it to the series that I'm going to discuss with you, they come from slightly different decades, different generations, and I think different times in the magazine as well. Yeah, if you're going to go based off just volume, average volume sales per volume, then Rurouni Kenshin does take the edge. It is maybe worth noting that during the time Weekly Shonen Jump that Rurouni Kenshin published, that was kind of what's considered the dark ages of the magazine. That in between period of these like titans of the 80s, early 90s that came to a close, and then probably around when One Piece started. So yeah, Rurouni Kenshin serialized throughout that whole period. And yeah, I will admit I do have a blind spot for the 90s in particular for Weekly Shonen Jump. Yeah, I feel like maybe it benefited from the magazine being in sort of this weird limbo struggling place, and it like found its slot right near the top throughout that period. So yeah, I think it didn't have as many big competitors in the magazine, which is not to detract from how good it was because or how good it performed, because clearly it was of the 90s, it was one of the big hits.
Okay.
But do you think Time and Place has a relevance for its popularity at all?
I do, but I question whether the level of competition is going to be enough to get people to follow a series and spend their money on volumes and all the other things that go involved with really turning a series into a monster hit. And I don't think that comes from the context of what else it's fighting against. I don't think that Kimetsu suffered when Jujutsu Kaisen became a huge hit. I don't think that detracted. I don't think there was a zero-sum game there. In fact, if anything, I think there was a sort of synergy, and it might even have been harder for Kenshin because it didn't have that momentum that the big three style momentum that you could get from really being part of a synergistic thing where the magazine is really on a roll. To a certain extent, I think it carried the magazine practically for a few years. Whether that makes it harder or easier is another question. But I think if you ask me what innate quality in Rurouni Kenshin makes it a kaiju, what made it so echo so strongly with people that it became a big hit, and a pretty big hit overseas too. I mean, when I was first getting into anime and manga, when it was a pretty small niche audience in the United States, RK was one of the biggest series among that group of people. It was much loved. Now, I think the reason for that is both Japanese and foreign audiences were very interested in the historical aspect of it. And even though Himura Kenshin is not based on a real, well, depends on who you ask. He may or may not be based on one or two real people, but he is not literally a real person. There are people in the series, though, who are avatars of real persons with the same name, historical figures from the Meiji Restoration. And the series is very much grounded in the politics and social upheaval of that time. To a fairly realistic way in a lot of respects. But I think the most significant reason why Kenshin is a kaiju is Kenshin. I think it's because Himura Kenshin is the most, in my view, he has the best story arc, the most pathos of any character in shonen. I don't call Rurouni Kenshin the single best shonen manga anime of all time. I don't think it is. I think it's fantastic. I don't think it's number one, but I think as a character, at least in terms of having an arc of a story, I think Kenshin's personal story is unparalleled. I think there's just so much depth to it. There's so much subtlety to it. And admittedly, not all of that comes through in the dark we'll be discussing, but it is there. I think I think I think that's the main reason for me why Kenshin is a kaiju is Kenshin. But I
I
also
think
think, as I
that's.
said, the
I was just going to say, I think the interesting part of this exercise, where we're going to be going over arc by arc of our respective favorite battle shonens in Weekly Shonen Jump, is one of us is experiencing it for the first time, and the other has the full knowledge of what's to come. And I know full well that you have this affection and love for how Kenshin is written as a character. So that definitely is in my mind as I'm reading it, and I can see glimmers of it here so far. So yeah, there's definitely going to be an element of one of us being like, "Oh, wait and see, you're about to get to the real stuff."
and the other thing I think we have to talk about. This is a subject that's come up on our podcast before, not this particular show, but on podcast discussions. And that's the background story behind Rurouni Kenshin and the difficulty, the problems people have because of the legal difficulties of the author, which is not a topic. I think it's certainly a valid topic. The reason I don't particularly like discussing it is because I don't see that much productive that can come out of discussing it at this point. People have kind of formed their opinions. They've calcified. But I think we should at least acknowledge, we're fully aware of it. I'm fully aware of it. And if people choose not to follow the series or, not to listen to, not to listen to the music of a certain German composer, and I certainly don't think we can put Watsuki on that level, but you get my point. There, the character of artists and the nature of art is a problematic thing, and I don't want to reopen that can of worms because we've pretty much eaten that can of worms already in previous discussions. But where do you think we stand at this point on Rurouni Kenshin going forward, as it is a very much a viable and now living franchise with new anime out there, and potentially, who knows, they could even make more live action movies. They were all monster hits. What do you think is the right way to deal with that side of it, Samu?
Well, I will say one of the reasons why maybe I hadn't explored the series and it's been like a gap in my Weekly Shonen Jump resume is because of that reason. It wasn't the top of my priority list because I wasn't like, oh, I need to read Nobuhiro Watsuki series. You've kind of touched on it already. Everyone's mileage varies on where they draw the line on the art and artist, and I think that's totally valid. However, anyone feels and is impacted by any particular case of this. So, I mean, this is a pretty egregious example, but yeah, I think maybe that was the reason why I held back a bit. But I think my personal take is unless something about the artist which we find reprehensible bleeds into this narrative, then I'm able to separate it somewhat. So that's why I read it and why I'm talking about it with you. But I think, yeah, we all just have to accept that everyone feels differently, and they're probably not going to change their opinion if they already have decided.
And I think it's also fair to say that there are manga where you can definitely see what one or another person might consider the noxious views of the mangaka bleeding over into the narrative. And I think people tried maybe a little too hard to find some evidence of that in with Kenshin, but I don't think there was ever anything remotely in the series to suggest any bleed over in that sense, which I suppose does make it easier to separate the two, the art and the artist. I mean, the art and the artist, the debate is an age-old one. It's in no one's minds is going to be changed at this point. So, but yes, that's just to say we are aware of it. a couple of other points. So, do you consider Rurouni Kenshin a battle shonen in the sense of Hunter x Hunter or Bleach or Naruto or those kinds of series? Do you consider it a battle shonen in the Weekly Shonen Jump tradition?
Well, that was one of my comments that I was going to make because as I was reading it, knowing that this is one of your defining definitive anime manga experiences, and knowing that maybe you don't necessarily love battle shonen because they're battle shonen.
Right.
As I was reading this, I was like, this really is a battle shonen. Like, oh my
Oh
god,
yeah.
this is not even like, it's not even some sort of hybrid. This just feels. I mean, I say, if I say boilerplate or like template, like not in a bad way, but it is a Weekly Shonen Jump series, which maybe I was twisting my expectations slightly because you're one of your favorites.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's kind of, for at least for this arc, this is a pretty straightforward battle shonen.
And it never stops being a battle shonen because Kenshin is a swordsman. He's a reluctant swordsman, but he is a swordsman. That's what defines him in many ways, and he's even aware. That's one of the things he deals with is that it's his skills with the sword that define him as a person, no matter what else he does. And there's a kind of a cruel irony to that. But there's a lot of cruel ironies to his character. That's only one of them. Let's talk
I
about.
do have
Go ahead.
I
Go
do
ahead.
have a point
Mm-hmm.
on the battle shonen side. I almost think that there are different types of approaches to action being depicted in battle shonen as well. Like, is it a series where characters shout out all these moves that they all have that are completely different? Is it one that it relies more on choreography, or is it something that uses big splashy impact pages to get across the action? So, like, for example, I would say the big three are definitely throwing moves at each other, less and less of all these different abilities that they have. I would say something more recent like Kagurabachi or maybe Chainsaw Man. You can see how it flows panel to panel. And then I think this definitely feels like one of those ones, at least in this arc. Maybe it changes with Watsuki's artwork as he goes on, but this feels like impact pages where you're not necessarily seeing the action beat by beat, but you're just seeing these big moments as they come around, which I just thought was interesting because when we get to our recommendations, that's also something I found in that other series that I'm going to recommend. I think it has a similar approach.
There's an interesting point that you raised there because the essence of Kenshin, and indeed the essence of Hiten Mitsurugi, which is the sword style, which is based on a couple of real sword styles, but it's an original creation. Um, the essence of it is the so-called beyond godlike speed, and in fact, Kenshin's legendary name, the Batosai, comes from Bato Jutsu, which is a sword move that is strictly speed. It's how fast can I draw my katana and bring it to impact with yours. And so, how do you depict that in a manga, which is a static art form, when you're using a static frame by frame, panel by panel uh, form of communication to bring across the idea of a swordsman whose main strength is speed. That's a challenge for Watsuki, obviously. I mean, you look at Kenshin. Kenshin is like 153 centimeters tall. He's not a big person. He's physically a small man. He's not an imposing man, much for that reason, in fact, that he was played by a woman in the original anime, which was kind of a revolutionary idea at the time it came out, and that became kind of a very iconic performance. But so I think Watsuki is really, I think he's a phenomenal artist. But I do think, as you said, that he does use the impact frame, impact page idea, because I think for what he was trying to communicate about Kenshin as a swordsman, I think that was really the only way he could do it in manga form. Anime obviously gives you more options, I would say. It's fair to say. Um, let's talk a little bit about some of the supporting cast here. First of all, Rurouni Kenshin. The title Rurouni, for those who don't know, is a word that Watsuki made up, but it's based on the Ronin idea, and it's sort of the idea of just the wandering, masterless samurai. But in his case, there's an additional element of someone who's on a redemption quest, so to speak. So he's the main character in the Tokyo arc. He winds up coming into contact with a woman named Kaoru, who runs the Kamiya Dojin, which was started by her father. A young boy named Yahiko Myojin, who was the son of a samurai who was orphaned by the corruption of the Meiji Restoration. A gentleman named Sanosuke, who's kind of a young ruffian who was on the opposing side to Kenshin as a child during the conflict. So let's talk about some of those characters. First of all, let's talk briefly about Yahiko, because Yahiko is, some people don't realize, is actually Watsuki's admitted self-insert character. Watsuki said that one of his motivations in drawing this series was that he himself was a lifetime lover of martial arts and kendo and was never any good at it. And he put Yahiko in a sense, to be the wide-eyed person who could watch others be magnificent at this skill that he didn't have. But in Yahiko's case, he gave him the tenacity and the skill to be able to learn it over time. What's your take on Yahiko as a character, and specifically as a self-insert character for the author?
Well, I didn't know that he was a self-insert character. That's interesting, because I will say, of all the characters that we've been introduced so far, like the main cast, Yahiko is actually my favorite character, by a good margin. Um,
Wow.
we jump between these different mini sub arcs within the larger Tokyo arc, and each character gets a couple times to shine. And I feel like whenever Yahiko was in focus, particularly his introduction, yeah, it just that hit a lot more than the other ones. And I mean, we'll touch on it more in the spoiler section, but the one where we have another character who is a mirror to him, sort of, in
Mm.
age. And yeah, maybe I do have one worry though, which is perhaps the ceiling for his character post Tokyo arc is lower than the others. That's maybe the sense that I'm getting for his character. So I'm more than willing to be swayed by like the character journeys that we're going to get later on. You can say however little or as much as you want, but I just feel like maybe Yahiko, just by the way he's written and his ability to impact the story, maybe in some ways, um, might fall short in that way. But if we're just going off of this arc, he really resonated with me quite a bit.
Hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
I would say it's interesting to hear you say that, because it takes me back to our Horo Mosuko discussion, because Wandering Sun, because he is also my favorite character among the side cast, because I think he has a what I appreciate about Yahiko is his courage in spite of his lack of physical ability to back it up. I mean, I think he, in many ways, a character like Yahiko is the purest expression of martial spirit, because it's a lot easier to be courageous when you're someone like Kenshin or even Sano, who has that massive combat ability. Yahiko is just a little kid, but he is governed by a set of beliefs that guide him through the story, and he develops, I think, a very interesting, somewhere in between a brother and son relationship between Yahiko and Kenshin, which I think is a great relationship, one of many great relationships in the story. Um, but as far as what his upside is and his ceiling, as you put it, in the future, as you note, that's a tough one to discuss, because we get into spoiler territory pretty quick there. I personally don't think it's a big issue with him, because I know where he goes in Kyoto and Jinshu. But all I can say is wait and see. I guess it's the best I can give you on that.
Yeah, I
Um,
think I'm more coming from the point of view of like maybe the essence of his character will remain as well as he's done here, but if this is going to continue to be a traditional battle shonen, generally there is an escalation and power and characters who are able to keep up necessarily like
mm,
with what's happening. And I
mm,
feel like out of the main cast, he might be the first one where there'll be narrative hurdles that he kind of has to be like, okay, guys, you go on, finish the rest. I think that's what I'm
Mm.
envisioning. But again, that's just me having no foresight of what's actually going to really happen.
Yeah, it's very interesting given in context of what will happen later. That's a very interesting comment. That's all I'll say. I want to talk about one other topic before we get into the spoilers, which is we've seen this with many Shonen Jump mangaka, including Watsuki, and non-Shonen Jump too. But it seems especially hit more Shonen than other demographics, and Shonen Jump more than other magazines. When mangaka have a really huge series, like a big monster hit, why? Well, I guess it's kind of obvious why, but maybe it isn't. Why do you think they have so much of a hard time moving on to other things? Like I think of Watsuki tried a couple of other series. Buso Renkin was modestly successful, but in the end, he wound up returning back to the Rurouni Kenshin universe. And when you think about the really big ones, One Piece, Bleach, Naruto, Kenshin, there are very few Shonen Jump mangaka who had huge hits who went on to have big series that were completely unrelated to their first series. We could look at you could look at Assassination Classroom and then going into Elusive Samurai, but Assassination Classroom didn't run for that long, even as popular as it was, and Elusive Samurai is not a monster hit, although it is successful. Why is it so hard? Really, the only one I can think of off the top of my head who had a monster hit and then came up and had another, or even in this case, even bigger monster hit is of course with Hunter x Hunter and Yu Yu Hakusho. Why do you think it is so hard for mangaka to do that?
Yeah, that is kind of true. Because I know between Rurouni Kenshin, or after Rurouni Kenshin, he had Gunblaze West, which was just a very short cancelled series, and then you mentioned Buso Renkin, which I believe is maybe like 10 volumes, which maybe means that it did get a soft cancellation later down the run. I'm not super familiar with those series yet, so yeah, I mean, it happens a lot. You touched on the big three. I mean, Naruto with Kishimoto, he tried to do something with Samurai 8 that just flopped massively, and I think that was a big wake up call for a lot of people that you can literally write and create this one of the biggest manga of all time, and you can still be treated with the Weekly Shonen Jump axe. It's pretty brutal. And then he's gone back to assisting and helping with Boruto now. Uh, Bleach with Tite Kubo, he's been kind of smart in that he's working on Burn the Witch on the side, which is kind of a spin off to Bleach. So that has actually done much better in comparison to Samurai 8. But then again, it's sort of an extension
But
of
it's
the
a
universe
spin-off,
as
though.
well.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
it's
spin-off.
not something different. Yeah.
Yeah. So and then there's other series where like there's other mangaka where you're like, okay, when are we going to see what's going to come post Demon Slayer? When are we going to see what's going to come post Haikyuu?
Yeah.
Because at the moment, those authors feel so tied to the identity of those series, which is maybe the problem. Maybe it is people just
Well,
dissociate.
Horikoshi too.
Sure, yeah. I mean, yeah. So it's probably is down to maybe association of the big thing that is recognizable and just comparing them. Whereas you do see other examples where if it's not like a massive mega hit, then there are quite a few mangaka who'd come back with a couple of medium hits. I mean, Assassin's
Mm.
Classroom is a mega hit, but the other two series are slightly less. I would say another one is Kento Shinomura, I believe.
That's a good
With the
call.
so you got Sket Dance and then you've got Witch Watch, which neither of them are these massive hits, but they're both kind of at a comfortable level, and he's managed to maintain that with um, the Astro series in between. So yeah, maybe it
Yeah.
also is like if you achieve the massive hit status, you've kind of like already used up your bank of ability to
Yeah.
like capture the audience, perhaps.
What's interesting is that the bigger the hit, the harder it is to break away from it. As you say, you get more cases of authors who have kind of mid hits, then they can come up with another mid hit. But if you have a monster hit, then the bigger the monster, the harder it is, I think. And whether that's because the audience has a harder time differentiating the manga from that universe, or it's literally harder for the mangaka themselves to do it because of the scope of what they did before. I think that's the interesting question. It is going to be interesting to see, like with Gotoge and with Horikoshi and all these people, which we don't really know what they're going to do next. But the odds are against them. Historically speaking, I would say the odds are against them coming up with something that's going to be anywhere close to as successful.
Maybe it is also a battle shonen thing as well, because you see in other genres that people can have repeat hits. I think of like Mizuki Kawashita, I believe. Quite a few in succession, like Strawberry 100,
Yeah.
Hatsukai Limited, Anidoki, like series that maybe none of them were massive
Yeah.
hits, but they
Yeah.
were able to deliver to the audience quite a few
Maybe it's
times. Yeah,
easier with romance or sports or
sure.
comedy. I mean, you look at Rumiko. I mean, she certainly had several big hits.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
it'll be very interesting. I mean, Togashi again. In so many ways, Togashi is a unicorn, but I think this is another way that Togashi is a unicorn because Yu Yu Hakusho was a really big hit. And then he came out and had an even bigger hit, and that's just so rare in that universe. But anyway, all right, let's jump into the spoiler side of things. And again, these are Tokyo Arc specific spoilers. And one thing that's interesting that you raised, Samu, is, and I didn't remember this, but I didn't reread the manga for this because I just watched the Tokyo Arc of the anime, which was very faithful in the reboot. But you said that he noted himself that the Sanosuke Captain Sozo backstory arc was the lowest point for the series in terms of popularity. You said Watsuki made reference to that himself in the author's notes or something like that. So
Yeah, it was in the
you
volumes.
asked
Yeah.
the question, why do you think that is? And I don't know really. It's funny. You said Yahiko is your favorite supporting character, or in fact, your favorite character. He's certainly my favorite supporting character. And you also said this was your favorite part of the Tokyo arc.
Hmm.
It's certainly in my top two or three. I mean, I think it's really good. Why do you think it did see a low ebb in terms of popularity? I'll give you my theory because it didn't have much Kenshin in it. I think you might want to go for the Occam's razor answer there. I think that's the most obvious reason.
I mean, it is quite early on in the run as well. And I think it was probably the most brutal part. It was in the note of the chapter where you see the decapitated head and the full backstory of what happened with Captain Sozo. So maybe it was just a case of this is an abrupt showing of just brutality for a character that at that point we didn't know too much about.
Hmm.
I actually quite liked it for that reason. I mean, the series, I imagine, is going to keep touching on this, but this idea of living with the past and moving on to the future and seeing these different organizations and groups of the past and how they all overlaid with each other in this messy conflict. Yeah, I just found this to be just a really fascinating little segment. And even though Sanosuke doesn't really, I think after this point, he kind of is like floating around a little bit for me. I do think that this confrontation that he has, this fight that he has with Kenshin, and then this flashback is probably the best stretch of this Tokyo arc for me.
Well, yeah, Sano. Yeah, I think Sano is used very effectively by Watsuki in this sub arc, mini arc, to show that one of Watsuki's main themes here is you have perfectly reasonable and intelligent non-evil people who are on diametrically opposed sides which were in abject war with each other and performed unspeakable atrocities against each other, and they all thought they were doing the right thing. And it's important to remember that Sano's side, Captain Sozo's side, was the side that was fighting against Kenshin's side. during the conflict. Um, so I do think this is a very, very important theme that Watsuki gets to, that you can't really point to a good and evil. He obviously, it's in direct relationship to the Meiji Restoration and the Civil War, but it goes beyond that. I think, and I think Japan is a history that is cycle after cycle of this sort of violence, and everyone in the midst of it is convinced that they're on the right side. And it would be so wonderful to talk about the Kenshin sword style and the philosophy behind it, because it really ties into this theme, but we can't, because that doesn't really come into play much until the next arc. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other mini arcs here. For example, one of the big arcs here was the Oniwabanshu arc, with Aoshi, and this is where the character Megumi, the doctor, is introduced. And tell me a little bit about your reflections on that particular story.
You can tell me if this is an unpopular opinion or not. That was the stretch of this arc where it was losing me, if I'm honest. I
Mm.
found it just to be. I found the group of villains that we were focusing on to be just quite silly in a way that I just couldn't really get into it much. I think there was potential with Megumi's character, and at least how it was established and set up. But once you then get to the action and then the characters split off, it felt to me like we were going through the motions a little bit. But then that is me not resonating with any of these villains that we were stuck on for quite a while. I believe maybe this is the longest mini sub arc that we have within the Tokyo arc as a whole.
I
So
believe so. Yeah.
yeah, but I also got the sense as I was reading it that I can imagine this part is quite popular. So yeah, I'm curious what your views are on it. If I'm a
Um,
complete outlier in what I'm saying.
I don't think I've ever heard any widespread opinion that it's a weak point. I don't know that it's considered to be like the highlight of Tokyo, but as far as I remember, it seems to be pretty well regarded. Um, so I would say, when I hear a lot of complaints about the Tokyo arc from some fans, a couple of them involve a couple of the episodic villains who some people consider to be less imposing and less impactful than others. But you mentioned earlier the other character, whose name is Yutaro, who's a young boy about Yahiko's age, but is comes from a very different background. His father is wealthy. Well, Yahiko's parents were samurai, certainly not wealthy samurai, but his father is a wealthy industrialist, and he gets caught up in this whole scenario where, with basically an anarchist who's trying to overthrow the government, and Yutaro falls under his sway. I think a lot of fans felt that arc had some weaknesses that ran too long. If I was going to point to one that I've heard a lot of complaints about, but again, I kind of liked that arc because I thought it tied in very well to the larger themes that Watsuki was going for. Do you have any particular feelings on that storyline?
I think I quite like that one. I mean, Raijuta, the villain of that section, I think he himself is maybe the not the most compelling, but because we had this B plot with Yutaro and Yahiko, I felt that had kind of more of a there was more of a heart to what was being depicted there. So like on balance, I think that was a nice section of the story.
Yeah,
Maybe
I
the
think so
actual
too.
I think the actual like maybe the actual showdown with Kenshin and Raijuta wasn't the most exciting, but that wasn't my favorite, so I wasn't too disappointed maybe in that way.
Okay, fair enough.
And then I mean
Um,
I was going to touch on another one that I did quite like, which was again funny one because Sanosuke is just not my favorite, but we get like a bookend with the Nishiki paintings, calling back to someone else who was under Captain Sozo. Um,
hmm.
I think that's maybe like the last part of the Tokyo arc. And even though Sanosuke himself, I'm not sold on his personality But I think where the story goes in terms of the history when he's involved, yeah, that little section was a highlight for me as well.
I agree. I'm amazed how often we're agreeing. I agree with you. I like that's an excellent sub story there. That's an excellent little. I don't even remember how long it is, 8 or 10 chapters maybe at most, but probably less than that. I did like that with his artist friend who makes explosives now. Um,
I can maybe
uh,
say something that maybe you'll disagree with then, if we want to find that.
yeah, go for it.
Um, I don't like how Kaoru's character is depicted. I think
Okay,
um, there is potential growth I'm imagining for her, and from what I gather from the periphery, that she is quite a well liked and respected character in the grand scheme of things within the series. So I'm hoping that she gets better depiction as it goes on. But I did feel that she was often used to undercut. She was being used to undercut her to then show how all these other characters were amazing, even though on paper the position that she has within her own dojo should make her a threat and someone very capable. And I think that was
interesting.
also in the volume comments where Watsuki like mentioned it, like, oh no, she's very skilled, she's able to do this, but these scenarios have just come up where someone else has taken the spotlight, and I think it just happens one too many times for me to be like, okay, I'm interested to see what Kaoru can actually do if the narrative allows her. So that's something I've got my eye on going forward.
Interesting. Well, I mean, from my perspective, considering that she's still a teenager, she's very young. There are times where she drives the humor in the story. I think it's fair to say. And Watsuki is another one of those battle shonen mangaka who does tend to occasionally go for madcap moments, like really almost jarringly madcap moments.
Slapstick.
Yeah, and I know you're not a fan of that style as a general rule. um, but she's definitely a big part of a lot of those because she's a big reactor. I mean, she reacts in a big
Mm.
way. So I like Karu. I think I think she's a fairly progressive and strong female character in the context of the time and place of the story. So I don't have a big problem with her. She's not a favorite of mine, and neither is Sano, but I think she's fine. And I do think her relationship with Kenshin specifically develops beautifully over the course of the story. And I want to touch it briefly on that, which is this Rurouni, this wanderer Kenshin, who's basically has his own past, which in a sense he's running away from, but also trying to confront. Why do you think in the end he decided to stop wandering and settle down in this particular place? Why do you think he decided, okay, I'm going to stop. Now I'm here. And he's very guarded about it. He never comes right out and says, "Okay, I'm no longer a Rurouni." It's like I'm always going to be a Rurouni, but for now I live here, and he basically becomes in a sense he becomes like a bodyguard, a protector of Kaoru and Yahiko, of the dojo, and but more of a set of ideals. And of course, he never. One thing you noticed, I'm sure, is that Kenshin never teaches anyone anything with the weapon, with the blade. He does not, like Yahiko, of course, wants Kenshin to train him on sword fighting and all the others, and Kenshin will have nothing to do with it. So why do you think Kenshin chooses to settle down here and now at this point in the story?
I think my prediction would maybe be it does come down to Kaoru and maybe his ability to let his guard down and maybe the purity that she has that he sees in her. I don't know if there's going to be some element of her maybe mirroring someone from the past. I genuinely have no idea. That's just an idea I'm throwing out there of like he's seeing her in someone else, or he's seeing someone else in her. Um, yeah, I think it does come from her specifically. Um, yeah, Kenshin is a
Okay.
funny one though. I mean, I feel like I'm in because so little of his maybe truth is really shown here. So I'm also not sure what I think about him beyond. his like shift from the past to present, this almost like pacifist, non-violent approach to being a sword fighter. So he's a hard one with limited knowledge to actually like pin down at this point. And I do wonder if how much of that was fully pre-planned, or is this Watsuki figuring out as he goes, like this concept of this character he has? Because different authors have different ways. Like, are they a gardener, are they an architect? And one is not necessarily
Mhm.
better than the other. It's just what works as the story goes on. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think that's where I'm at.
Okay. Let's then segue into what I kind of want to wrap up on Kenshin as a character for this part of the story. And when I look at Kenshin, I see a lot of other characters who I feel were influenced by him, namely Thorfinn in Vinland Saga, and Balsa in the Moribito novels. Are you familiar with? I know you've Vinland Saga. You have some familiarity with. I know. How about Seirei no Moribito? Do you have any familiarity with that?
Yeah, I've watched Seven no Moribito and a season and a
Okay.
half of Vinland Saga. So yeah, definitely.
I mean, so I think in all of these characters we see some commonalities. Kenshin, of course, came first, um, but they've all they're all exceptionally good at killing people, and they all kind of evolve past that in different ways. Um, and they all have their own approach to it. So when you've done the things that Kenshin has done in the past, and don't forget that his unofficial official job title was the Manslayer. So we knew what he did for a living when he was working for the Restorationists, the Imperialists. Um, how do you come down on someone like Kenshin uh, atoning? Uh, is there too much guilt there for someone to have the right to live on and atone for it? Should is it more would it be more right for him to have taken his own life, or for him to be in a jail somewhere, or is it better that he's out living in the world trying to make amends for those things that happened in his past?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but he did work for the people who the restorationists who won in the end, and then
Yes, he worked for the winning side.
yeah, and then he refused to take this position that other people that he was with took. Um, so in the eyes of the law, he's obviously exempt from doing having any wrongdoing because he was the winner. But I think the personal regret that he has, yeah, it's a good driving motivation. Even if I feel like I still don't know the enough details of what happened yet to get the full story. I do think it's also the main driver of the main character in the other series that we're going to discuss after this that I recommended to you. This idea of regret being the motivation for doing better. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I'm a fan of that. I think in how it's being depicted here, I haven't got the sense yet that Kenshin, even though we're being told by these mob characters who interact with him that, oh my god, this is this guy who's done these horrible things. I think I'm waiting to see the picture become the puzzle, like the pieces all coming together, so that I can see what the contrast is actually going to really be like from then and now.
This is another one of those topics
I
that's
feel like you're
hard to
having
get
to hold your
into
tongue a
without
lot.
a lot. Yeah. All right. So we're gonna do our normal recommendations thing, but before we do that, I want to take a little sidelight here because we did. This is a topic we've talked about in previous shows. So, what series that currently runs in Jump? You love to talk about the children's series and grandchildren series and all this. So, what series currently running in the Jump family? And I'll let you include Jump Plus or Jump Square in this. Do you think is the most direct descendant of Rurouni Kenshin? I actually had an answer, but I'm not going to use it because I have a feeling it may steal some thunder from something you're going to talk about in a little bit. So I'm going to use a different series, which is the Bugle Call, which I think the Bugle Call runs in Jump Square, doesn't it? I think it's Jump Square. The Bugle Call is a series about it's about a young boy about 14, 15 years old who longs to be a musician. He plays the horn, the trumpet, and he ends up getting caught in warfare because he has a unique ability. I won't go into too much details in case you decide to read that series. But this is, again, it runs in Jump Square. The author on this, it's a Sora Mozuku and Tomori Higoro. And the reason, ironically, I got into the Bugle Call, the full title is Bugle Call Song of War, Sensho Kyo Shitsu, is because it was recommended by Yukimura Sensei, the author of Vinland Saga, which is a series that has a main character I feel is enormously influenced by Kenshin. So I think it's not that surprising then that I fall on the Bugle Call as my pick as the current Jump family series that's most directly descended from Rurouni Kenshin. How about you? What would you say, in your view, is the current Jump series that's most directly descended from Rurouni Kenshin?
Well, I could cheat and be like, I feel like the Jump Square title that is most of the best descendant is Rurouni Kenshin, the Hokkaido arc.
But
Um,
I said no, same author. That's my rule. So
okay, can I also use this as the segue then to go into
yes,
recommendations
go
if I
ahead.
can jump
Let's
first?
talk about recommendations, and then Samu can talk about the series that I actually think I might have used as my answer if I didn't know he was going to recommend it.
Okay, okay,
Go
so
ahead.
it's a double answer. I think the biggest comparison I can give, and also my recommendation would be The Elusive Samurai by Yuusei Matsui. Very quite hundreds and hundreds of years apart in Japanese history in the times they're depicting. But I think this was when I mentioned the type of battle shonen series this is in terms of not necessarily focusing on choreography or these like magic system, these powers and abilities characters have, but these impact pages, whichever your preference may be. I have my own on what I find most enjoyable, but the Elusive Samurai is definitely that sort of series. Matsui loves these super highly detailed artistic, like painterly, like full spreads, like a single page spread of a moment within a fight. um I think, not to sound too negative about it, but I think Matsui and Watsuki, I think they have maybe limitations in how they can depict the moment to moment of the fight. I think the panel flow isn't my favorite personally. Um, but yeah, I think the visual aesthetic and the style is very, very similar. I felt that as I was reading this whole arc, and also just down to like character designs as well. Um, a lot of big yaoi chins in Rurouni Kenshin in this arc. These men with these burly, giant, long features,
Hmm.
uh, which are like played up to be comical, but I think also just lend into the art style that they are comfortable drawing, both Matsui and Watsuki. Yeah, they kind of like show, they wear the ugliness of the characters on them and make it a part of their shtick, I suppose. So yeah, it is mostly on an aesthetic level, but I think that would be my double answer to that question.
Yeah. Okay. That's a great pick. And as I mentioned earlier, I think Matsui and Watsuki both also share a certain love of the same style of humor. Um, but although I think Matsui takes it considerably farther more often than Watsuki does. But I do think that they both have a reliance on these, as you said, impact pages. These beautiful, like almost like prints, woodblock prints on a manga page, rather than a highly cinematic experience. Which, like, I think of something like Chainsaw Man as being an extremely cinematic manga, in a very surrealistic way. And I think the Elusive Samurai has a sense of surrealism to it, but it's not cinematic. It's more like Dolly. Even though
Yeah,
Dolly did go on to be a filmmaker, I think of the Dolly as the artist, as the flat panel artist, as the painter on a canvas. I see that in both Watsuki and Matsui. And I will say, for the record, it probably would have been my pick for the most direct descendant if I hadn't known you were picking it as your recommendation. But I'm very happy with the Bugle Call too. But my actual recommendation is Vagabond, which is a series that we've discussed before by Inoue Takehiko, who is, by the way, a mangaka who went from one monster hit to another monster hit. In fact, he's had 3 monster hits, so good on him. But not battle shonen in the sense that they're not shonen series; they're seinen. But Vagabond
Minus Slam Dunk.
is minus Slam Dunk. You're right, that is shonen. But so Vagabond is another one of those series that has incredible impact pages. The impact pages that Inoue delivers are, I think, pretty close to unmatched in manga. But he is also more cinematic, which I think he demonstrated in directing the Slam Dunk movie, which has been a monster success. But in the pages of Vagabond, it does rely on those kind of impact panels, but also because you have a main character who is similarly complex, similarly troubled by a past, and someone who is defined by this incredible godlike skill they have with the sword, which has proved to be the defining element of their life, even as they've tried to move past it. So I think there is something of a similarity in the personal journey there too. So my pick would be Vagabond by Takehiko, which is Takehiko, which is frankly one of the very few manga that I would rank even higher than Rurouni Kenshin. So I that's a pick that I love. It's a great series, and I do think if you love Rurouni Kenshin, you'll probably love Vagabond, and if you love Vagabond, you'll probably love Rurouni Kenshin, and ultimately that's the main reason I think you recommend a series. Okay, now it's time for overview and the scores. So my score, I will say, let me ask you this question. Do you want me to score the Tokyo arc, or do you want me to score Rurouni Kenshin as a series? Do you want me to do this Hunter x Hunter style and only score the arc that we're talking about?
Yes, let's just do scores per arc.
All right. 82. 82.
82.
That's
okay.
my score for the Tokyo. That's my score for the Tokyo arc.
I will minus 10 from that. I'll give 72.
Okay.
There was times where maybe I was more like 75, 76 when we were in the first volume or two and we were introducing the characters and, we're in those storylines that I really liked. But I think there was a couple that, like I said, the Oniwabanshu, Megumi stuff, that kind of brought it down for me. And similar to the series that we're going to talk about after this, I feel like this is also, it's a Weekly Shonen Jump battle title that is finding its footing and identity as it's going along, which is so very much the case because these authors are trying to grab the reader's attention as fast as they can. And sometimes I think, actually, I would say across the board, these titles that end up becoming on big, massive hits and later arcs becoming what they're known for, perhaps the first arcs don't have that level of quality because it is kind of a scramble to find all these things that like piece together to then become what the series identity is. So I did feel that when I was reading Tokyo Arc. So that's maybe my other main reason for docking a few points.
And I would also say, I think it's certainly a valid point that this was his first manga. I don't think he might have had a one shot or some other very minor thing.
No, he had 3 one-shots, I believe, before this, because I've read them all. They're all in the volumes that I read. And I wasn't very keen on his very first one, the Crescent Moon one, but there were 2 pilots for Rurouni Kenshin where he took different arcs and the characters were all mixed around, and it was a fun thing to compare. But yeah, this was after 3 one-shots. This was his first serialization. So
yeah. So it takes time to figure out how to do this. It really does. And in battle shonen terms, Tokyo is relatively short, really. It's a relatively short arc. So okay, that's good. So all right. So that's our that's our little hour or so on Rurouni Kenshin, the Tokyo arc, which now Samu can finally say he's got that arrow in his quiver. His Shonen Jump resume has one big X mark in it that was blank before. And we're going to go on next. Our next time is going to be kind of a role reversal, but we'll let Samu introduce that when we get there. In the meantime, Samu, thank you for reading Rurouni Kenshin. Thank you for giving it a shot. And for the record, your score was right around where I kind of expected you to score this.
Okay, good. I'm glad. Yeah, I'm curious to see how our next conversation is going to go. And anyone who's listened to me in any of the episodes before this, I think you can probably guess which Weekly Shonen Jump title we're going to do next. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yes, stay tuned for a whole hour on Inue's Exorcist. No, of course. Just kidding. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. As always, I will implore you, as is my wont, to. Well, we're heading into springtime, but screw it. I'll say it anyway. Stay frosty. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.